In this video, we're going to be going over an incredibly fun PvE DPS build in New World. This build is going to utilize the sword and shield for your main hand DPS weapon. And then on the back bar, you're going to be using the Warhammer for a lot of utility that's going to provide to you and your team. So let's start off by taking a look at our mastery trees. We're going to start off by looking at the sword and shield tree, and our 3 active abilities for the sword and shield are going to be reverse stab, leaping strike, and shield rush. If we take a look at the sword master tree here, we're going to push reverse stab all the way down to max, and this is just going to deal a lot of damage whenever you utilize this ability. You're going to have grit, and with a successful hit with your reverse stab, all other sword cooldowns are going to be reduced by 25%, which is pretty incredible to work this into your rotation. And then we are going to take leaping strike. Leaping strike is an incredibly fun ability to use. It's going to deal some damage. It's going to be almost like an execute. You're going to deal 50% more damage to foes below 30% health. We're going to push all the way down and also take the slow. We're going to take as many slows in this build as we can because they are going to synergize very well with opportunists. All the slowed foes you're going to deal 10% more damage to, which is quite nice whenever you take this passive. Then all the rest of the passives in this tree just really enhance your damage. So for example, we're going to take empowered stab. This is really what you're going to start all of your combos off with, or all of your rotation off with whenever you start fighting mobs. You're going to want to get that empower before you start popping abilities. We're going to take Achilles heel, which is going to slow enemies with the final attack in your light attack chain, which is nice because again, we're going to take opportunist, which is going to deal more damage to those slowed foes. We're also going to take precision to give you increased critical strike chance. We're going to take freeing justice because you are going to be heavy attacking a lot in order to proc this empower, and then opportunist, and then confidence, which is just going to give you 15% more damage when your health is full. And then of course we're going to take leadership. This is one of the best key passives or ultimates or whatever you want to call it in the game. Whenever you're holding a sword, the damage of all group members is increased by 10%, which is quite nice. And then if we move on over here to the defender side of the tree, we're going to be taking shield rush. Shield rush is a super fun ability to use. I really like it. It's going to provide a lot of utility to your team, and we're going to push all the way down to get the slow because again, we want to slow the foes so we can get the 10% more damage from opportunists. So we have shield rush is going to stagger and push back your opponents, and then you are going to apply a weaken in a 5-meter radius. It's a 20% weaken for 10 seconds, which is pretty nice against big clumps and even against bosses. And then we have intimidating rush, which is going to slow all of the enemies sit within 5 meters of you by 30% for 4 seconds. And then for the passives, we're just going to take sturdy shield, which is going to give you 15% more physical armor, elemental resistance, which is going to mitigate a little bit more elemental damage. And then we're going to take final blow. So the third attack in your light attack chain is now going to deal 15% more damage. And this is a pretty nice passive to take because it is going to enhance your DPS by a decent amount. And also remember, you have the final attack in your light attack chain is going to slow. So not only are you going to deal more damage, you're going to slow, and then that's going to synergize with opportunists. So the entire build just works quite nice together. This is a super fun setup. I really like this for the sword and shield DPS abilities. If you haven't tried this already, I highly recommend trying it out. It is an incredibly fun 3 abilities to take. Now we're going to jump over and take a look at the Warhammer and the masteries that we're going to take for this weapon. We are going to take Armor Breaker, Wrecking Ball, and Shockwave as our active abilities. Armor Breaker, we're going to push this all the way down in order to gain grit. This is also going to apply a 20% rend to your target for 10 seconds, which is pretty nice. And then you're going to increase Armor Breaker's damage by 25% against targets at full health. So this is the ability you're really going to want to open with. We'll talk more about the rotation here in just a moment, but you'll open with this, and then you'll switch over to sword, heavy attack, and then go into the rest of your rotation. Then we are going to take Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is just an incredible CC ability. It's going to knock your enemies down. It has grit. It's super nice. And then you're also going to gain fortify, so you're going to get a little bit of tankiness added on top of it. And then you're going to expand the range of Wrecking Ball to a 1.5 meter radius, so you can hit the clumps. Pretty nice with the ability. The rest of the passives in this tree are just going to kind of enhance the damage for the Warhammer. We're not too terribly worried about these because you're only going to be switching over to the Warhammer for the utility and the CC that this provides. So we're not too terribly worried about the passives or the amount of damage that you're pumping out with this weapon. You're going to use the Warhammer. You're going to switch directly back over to the sword and shield, and that's where you're going to be pumping your damage. And then on the Crowd Crusher side of the tree, we're going to take Shockwave. It's incredibly nice to have. This is a big AoE stun. Super nice crowd control ability. This also has a weaken in the kit too. And then we have Meteoric Crater, which is just going to expand the range of the Shockwave. Very important to take that too. And then we're going to take the heal. So every time you use your Shockwave over here, you're going to heal for 35% of the damage dealt. So again, the passives, I don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on these for the Warhammer side of the tree because you are just using it for utility. You're going to use your rend, you're going to use your stun and the weaken, and then you're going to use your Wrecking Ball for additional CC as needed. Now let's take a look at the attributes. So this is the setup that I really like to use: 265 strength, 200 dex, and 50 constitution. Of course, you can push your constitution down to 5 once you get super comfortable with the build, or you can pump your constitution up a little bit more if you feel like you need to because of survivability reasons. If you're not running with a good group, or if you're unfamiliar with the group, I would push the constitution up to 100 and then probably drop my strength down, because I really like this 200 dex bonus for the 10% backstab and headshot damage. But overall, this is the setup. This is what I like to use. It pumps out a lot of damage whenever you run it this way. Now let's roll over here and take a look at the gear that we're wearing and what we're using for this build. I do not have BIS stuff for this build yet, but I do really like this build, so I think we're going to work our way into it at some point. But this is what we're running for this build. On the sword itself, I found this in my storage. It was Empowering Leaping Strike, Lost Bane, and Keenly Empowered. Ideally, I'd like to have Empowering Leaping Strike on my armor and not on my sword. And if I were shooting for BIS for this, I would shoot for Bane and then Vicious and probably Refreshing Move or Keenly Jagged. That's the sword that I would be shooting for this build if I was shooting for BIS. And then on the Warhammer itself, I also just had this one in storage: Trenchant Crits and Lost Bane. Definitely not fantastic. What I would shoot for is Bane and then Sundering Shockwave on the weapon. That is an important one to have. And then I would shoot for probably Vicious as the third perk. And then let's take a look at our armor. I've been running Barnacles and Black Powder because that's the mutation this week. So I have the entire Admiral set. If you want this set, this drops out of Barnacles and Black Powder from the Admiral. I think you can get it at any mutation level. It's a very good set. So if you want to run this build, I would highly recommend it. But for this build, you're going to want to be in all light armor, because you're going to have to use a round shield to keep you in the light armor category, because you're going to want to be pumping out the 20% more base damage for this build. But if I were shooting for best in slot for any other build, perks that I would shoot for would be 5-piece ward, 5-piece refreshing, and then I would shoot for Empowering Leaping Strike on one of these pieces. And then the other 4 pieces can be subjective. You could go with physical aversion or elemental aversion, or whatever you wanted for that third perk, whatever you thought would be good for the specific expedition that you are trying to run. There's many options that you can choose from there. But when all else fails, something like physical aversion or elemental aversion will be fine, along with refreshing. But just make sure you have 5-piece ward, and then I would shoot for 5-piece refreshing and then 1-piece Empowering Leaping Strike, and you'll be just fine for the expeditions. And then for the shield, you're going to want to be utilizing a round shield for this build, and you most definitely want to try to have a Bane shield. Right now for this build, I have a Lost Ward shield because unfortunately I do not have a Lost Bane round shield yet. I'm trying to get one, and once I get one, I will 100% replace this shield with a Lost Bane shield. But that's what you want. You really can't choose your perks on these because Bane shields are only dropped within expeditions, but they do stack. Bane on your shield and your sword does stack, so that's what you're going to want to shoot for, is having Bane on the shield and on the sword, and then you'll be good to go. And a lot of times this will drop with something like Fortifying Shield Rush, Bane, and then Refreshing or something like that. And those are really good shields to get. I am still in the hunt for one, and once I get it, I will replace this shield. But if you can get a ward shield in the meantime, what I have on right now is perfectly fine. Lost Ward Enchanted Keen or something to this effect would be great. It will definitely help enhance your DPS if you have enchanted or other perks on this shield. And then Lost Ward, of course, helps with the damage absorption against that enemy type. So there's nothing wrong with this shield, but I would most definitely prefer Bane on here to do that additional DPS. And then for the jewelry, for the amulet, you're going to want to shoot for protection for whichever mutation type you are doing. And then you're going to want to have health on here. And then your third perk, you would probably want to have refreshing on there, or maybe even something like divine would be great. Purify is fine. This amulet is okay, but nonetheless, it would be like nature protection, health, and then refreshing or divine, I think would be better. And then you would really not want constitution on any of your gear as a DPS. That way you'll have flexibility to either move your constitution up or move it down all the way to 5 con if you're with a cracked group. But nonetheless, for this build specifically, I would shoot for either strength or dex on the amulet itself. And now let's take a look at the ring. Legate's ring again in this build works fantastic. For slash damage, keen awareness, leeching, I think this is about as good as it gets, so you just might as well go farm this ring out. It comes from Chest and Brimstone Sands, but this is a perfect ring to slot for this particular build, so I would highly recommend going to farm this out. Leeching, slash damage, keen awareness, super good. And then for the earring, we just are using the Doom's Chance. The Doom's Chance works just fine for this particular build. Refreshing, toast, regenerating. I would recommend going to get this, but if I were shooting for BIS, I would probably want to get Beloved on the earring. I'm a Beloved believer now. I've been using that recently, and it does help some. It's not 100% necessary, I would say, but it's definitely helpful to have that on your gear. So I would probably shoot for Beloved, Refreshing Toast, and then something like Refreshing or Purifying Toast would be probably what I would consider a BIS earring. But nonetheless, if you don't have that, don't want to spend the money on that, Doom's Chance works just fine. Just throw this into the build and you'll be good to go. And then for the Heartrune, if you watched any of my other build videos, you'll know that the Heartrunes I think are very subjective. It just depends on what your team is running and what your team needs and the expedition that you're running at the time. So there are a lot of different options that you could use. For example, using Bile Bomb in certain situations is very good. Using Vines in other situations is very good. But if all else fails, you can just throw Detonate on your bar and you will be just fine. And then as far as gems go, much like a lot of my other PvE builds that we do, I always run full opals whenever I'm running DPS. If I'm trying to speed run or running 5 cons, sometimes I'll put elemental specific gems in my gear, but for the vast majority of my play, I run opals in all of my armor, and then I just run the specific elemental protection on my amulet, and then I slot that specific elemental protection gem within that amulet, and then I roll with that. If this doesn't work for you, or if you feel like you're taking too much damage from the mutation elements itself, you can always switch these out for specific gems, elemental specific gems, and then you'll be okay. And then for the weapons, I'm just using opals in both. However, I have wanted to experiment with using a malachite in my sword because a lot of times the mobs are going to be CC'd with all the slows that you throw out there with your sword, but I'm not sure if that's going to be optimal or not. So I just go with the opal. It's 15% more damage while your stamina is not full. I'm a big fan of using the opal in all of my DPS builds, or in most of them. Sometimes I'll switch it up, but most of the time this is what I use. Now let's talk about the rotation of this build and how we are going to use this build. So the thing that you're going to want to open with is Armor Breaker. It's the Warhammer ability. So start with Armor Breaker because this is going to rend your target, and then you're going to switch directly over to your Sword and Shield. Whenever you switch over to your Sword and Shield, you're going to want to lead with a heavy attack because you're taking the Empowered Stab passive. This is going to grant you a 30% empower for 5 seconds. As soon as you empower Stab, you want a Leaping Strike into your targets. This is not only going to slow your target, it's going to deal a little bit of damage, and then you're going to go into a Reverse Stab. You want to do all that pretty quickly so you can maintain your empower. And for Leaping Strike, you do not want to use Shield Rush or any other ability right after Leaping Strike other than either a sword, light attack, heavy attack, or another sword specific ability. If you use a shield ability right after you Leaping Strike, it does not proc the empowering Leaping Strike, so you will not get additional damage. So if you use your Leaping Strike into the mob in order to proc your empowering Leaping Strike buff, and then you Shield Rush, it's not going to do anything. So you want to make sure that you're following up your Leaping Strike with another sword ability. That's why we do empowering Leaping Strike and then go straight into the Reverse Stab, because Reverse Stab already does a ton of damage. And so whenever you stack that on your Empower plus your empowering Leaping Strike, you've got a ton of weapon and power going on here. So you're going to just do a ton of damage with your Reverse Stab. And then after you do your full combo, you can then go into your Shield Rush to weaken the mob, or you could even open with your Shield Rush and then do the rest of the combo that we just talked about if you wanted to go that way. I typically do Shield Rush at the end because I'm trying to pump as much DPS as quickly as possible. And then if mobs are still alive, I'll go into the Shield Rush to weaken them so that we can then finish them off. And then the other two abilities on the Warhammer, your Wrecking Ball and your Shockwave, you're just going to use those in situational circumstances in order to CC your opponent. If the mobs are still alive after you run through your rotation, you can Wrecking Ball into a Shockwave, or you can Shockwave to stun the group of mobs or to interrupt a specific attack. Whatever you need to do to apply CC and to utilize that extra utility. And then remember, you're going to want to have Sundering Shockwave on your weapon. So your Shockwave is going to rend and weaken enemies, which is quite nice for your team. And then Wrecking Ball is also just a really nice CC. So you have that in your back pocket as well. So I would recommend just using those when needed. They're not necessarily a part of your full rotation, but they are very nice utility abilities to use whenever you need to CC the enemies. But that's the full rotation. That's how I like to play this build. It is incredibly fun. I have had a massive amount of fun playing this build. It is highly mobile with Leaping Strike. You do a whole lot of damage, and once you get Bane on your shield and your sword, it's a ton of fun, and it just synergizes very well. I really like this build. This is, again, one of my favorite builds that I put together so far. I really enjoyed the Rapier Void Gauntlet DPS build that we did a while back. If you haven't watched that video, I'll make sure to link that down in the description below so you can check that out if you're interested in another DPS build. But that'll do it for this one, boys and girls. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. That build is super fun. I highly recommend it if you like the DPS in New World. But thank you guys again for watching. I appreciate you guys a whole lot. If you enjoy New World, enjoy New World content, please make sure to like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that a whole lot as well. And of course, we stream every Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock a.m. CST over at twitch.tv/BDLG. I'd love to see you come hang out over there. We do a lot of things, have a whole lot of fun over there, and we enjoy New World and play some other games every now and then. But thank you guys again. I appreciate it. We'll see you in the next one.